Good morning everybody and welcome to today's webinar. So today we are talking all about Capture One Express for Sony and Fujifilm. So we'll be looking at simply how to get started, how you can make some great edits on your photos, exporting to final formats, and a few other things as well. Oh, let me just turn my monitor down, otherwise you're going to hear me twice and you don't want that. Okay, so before we get started, just a couple of things, housekeeping things. So my name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And as usual, we have the maximum amount of time today for 60 minutes. I might extend that if anyone's interested and wants to have a little look at Capture One Pro at the end, then we can just ask around at the end. I am recording everything as well, so don't worry about if you miss anything or don't understand something. You can always watch the recording, and our recordings always go up on our Learning Hub, and you'll receive an email tomorrow sometime letting you know when it's available. Now, lots of you have found the chat room already. Just to let you know, that is public, of course, so be nice and friendly to one another, which it looks like you are. That's great. If you want to ask a question, just to let you know, if you do put it in the chat, because there's so many of you today, myself and Andre, who's also online as well as one of our staff at Capture One, we might miss it. So probably the best thing to do is, if you do want to ask an actual question, is either tick that box, add to Q&A, or also put it directly into the Q&A as well. And then that way we won't miss it. Now there is, again, lots of you today, so if we don't get to your actual question, then I'm sorry about that, but we'll try and answer as many as possible without coming off thread. Now, if none of that is interesting for you, chatting or answering questions, and you just want to sit back and listen, that's fine. Those two icons there, if you click the small arrow to the right, then that will just hide the chat and give you a bit more space on screen as well. All right, so let us begin. So as I said, today is all about Capture One Express. And we're just going to go through, the basics of getting started, editing some shots, teaching you about the interface so you know where to find everything as well. And we have lots of resources to help you, so don't feel that once this is over you're on your own. That's certainly not the case. So I'm going to start Express as if it was you working at home, and then so you can see the steps that we need to go through. So down here we've got Capture One. So let's open this up, and then what you'll see is, oh, it's on my other monitor, let's bring it over. What you'll see is this startup screen, welcome to Capture One. And if you want to run Express, what you need to look for is the bottom option. So down here we've got more options, and then you'll see the first two are for Express Fujifilm and for Express for Sony. So today I'm just going to run Express Fujifilm just because I happen to have some Fuji images, but the experience is exactly the same whether you're on Sony or Fuji. So let's say Express Fujifilm, like so. And then Capture One will create a default catalog. That's just a simple database that collates all your images, and then open up with the standard interface like so. Now, what you see on screen also that pops up is our resource hub. Now, it's very tempting to close those kind of things straight away, but this is actually a really handy little online resource portal, if you like, which has tutorials, webinars, which you're watching now, of course, and the previous recorded ones, and also direct access to support as well. So that will pop up on startup, but you can always get back to it from the help menu as well, and you can see here the resource hub. So that's a really great way to just keep getting comfortable with Capture One. So let's close that down. Let's hide my face. So standard memory card, nothing fancy about that. So I'm just going to put that into my reader. 1 second, without knocking the computer off the desk. And sorry, I just muted myself. There we go. I pressed the wrong button, so audio should be back now. Sorry about that. I just keep an eye on that. I just saw my audio deck for some reason decided to mute me, so sorry about that. All right, so audio is back. So yes, when you plug in the card reader, then the import window will pop up automatically, or you can click that in. Sorry, you said no audio. Let me just double check. Should be fine now. I'm just listing on my monitor, so sorry about that. Sounds okay to me, so I think we're good now. Excellent. All right, good stuff. Okay, so sorry about that slight hiccup there. That was human error. All right, so okay, we've got our import images dialog that pops up. So this is showing me the contents of my memory card that I put in the card reader, like so. And this is giving me a preview of those 76 images. Now, the only thing that we really sort of have to worry about here is what do we want to do with those images in the import to dialog here, for example. Yes, I know I've turned my face off, Alexandra, don't worry. That comes back periodically every now and then when I feel it's relevant. All right, so destination here, what do we want to do with those images? So I'm going to not leave them in their current location because they're on the memory card. So we want to put them somewhere safe. So let's just choose a folder where to put those. So we're going to put these in the pictures folder. So I'm going to say set that as my import folder, like so. And then we can make a subfolder here as well. So these are from a trip to Sweden. So let's just call this Sweden vacation, like so. All right, now everything else, if you're learning Express, I wouldn't worry about this too much now, but it has, you know, additional options for naming, adding some metadata and so on. But let's just keep it nice and simple today and say import all, and then the pictures are going to start popping in like so. Now, while that's happening, let's just open one up. Let's bring my face back and make sure I don't mute myself again. That would be smart. So while that's happening, of course, you can see now the images are populating along the bottom. So this is the area that we call our browser. So this is what we know as the browser. Now in the middle, so where we've got this nice photo like so, this is what we call the viewer. So this is where we see our currently selected photo. Now on the right hand side, this is where we have our various different tool tabs. So just above where I'm sitting, our tool tabs split into various different categories. So this is where we do the edits and adjustments to our images, for example. Now along the top, this is, so just around this area right at the top of your screen, this is what we call the toolbar. So this has the cursor tools in the center. We'll talk a bit more about those, which changes the behavior of the cursor. So it might change the cursor into cropping an image, straightening, or something like that. And then over on the right hand side, we've got these various action buttons that do auto adjustments, which we're going to look at, copy pasting, resetting, all that kind of stuff. Now what this import process, this is a background task. So we've got our activity monitor here showing us how far we've gone through our import process, and then we can see those shots coming in along the bottom like so. Now this dialog here, generating previews, what does that mean? Every single image that we bring into Capture One Express, we create a small preview, which means when I'm browsing through the images, we don't actually have to read all that massive raw data, we're just using the preview. So it makes browsing nice and fast and quick and so on. So let's get that out of the way. Now the various elements, for example, the browser, the viewer, tool tabs on the right hand side, we can hide and show those. So if we look in the view menu, we can see those various different categories. So for example, if I wanted to hide my browser, I can just do it like so, and then we have a cleaner view. Equally, if we bring this back, if I want to hide my viewer and just have a browser view like so, then we can do so as well, and we can change that to a grid view or just have the film strip and so on and so forth. Now there's a few other sort of customization options in there as well, and you can explore those, so you can make some minor changes to the interface. So for example, if you like to have your tools on the left hand side, you can do so, but I'll leave that up to you to look at those options. All right, now you might be thinking, well, how do I import again? Because that large import button has disappeared. Easiest way, up here on the left hand side, is the import button. So if we tap this once more, and we will import something a bit later on, then we're back into that import dialog. Now next question, where are my images? How do I access them? So the very first tool tab, for example, is your library tool tab. So this shows you exactly where all your images are. So we can see, for example, if I expand out my browser folder here, folder here, we can see that on my Mac hard drive in this particular location, this is where my pictures are. So if I import again, and we're going to do that a bit later, then we'll be able to flip back and forth between those various folders. Now, if you want to make collections like of your favorite shots for printing or just collections of any particular kind, then we can make something like an album as well. If there's time, we get into a bit more catalog organization as well. Okay, so now the important thing, we all enjoy editing our pictures, so let's get into that a little bit so you can see how the tools work. Now I'm purposely going to pick an image which maybe isn't the best in terms of exposure. It's very easy to show you edits on shots that come out of camera and are nice and simple, but this way we're going to show you something that's, a bit more challenging, for example. Before we get to that, I'll just check if there's any questions. Let's see. Yeah, costs. We'll talk about buying. Express is free. Remember, you can use Express free forever and ever and ever and ever. So as long as it's supported on your computer and architecture and camera and so on, then you can use it forever. If you're interested into Pro, which we'll have a look later, then we can do so. Alrighty. Okay. And what was Carl saying? Captions for various tools, as they're quite big at times. Well, when we get into looking at the tools, we can see how it's working. All right. Okay. So now the tools for editing your pictures are over here on the right hand side. Now there's one tool tab called the Quick tool tab, which basically has all the kind of essential tools that you need for editing. So I'm just going to hide myself for a second, so I don't want to cover up the various different tools. And let's run through an edit on this shot to see how it works. Okay, so now we can obviously tell that this image is a bit on the dark side. So in the Quick tool tab, once again, I said this has all your basic image editing tools. So first of all, we can see this is a little on the dark side. So the obvious thing to do, as if we were editing in camera, if you like, is just to raise the exposure like so. So let's bring that up a little bit. Now, white balance wise, I can also tell that, this was shot at sunset, so it's a bit too cold. So now, of course, there's the ideal white balance, and I could grab the picker here and look for something kind of gray to click on, or I can do it by eye and just drag the slider till I think it looks better. So something like that is closer. Now, high dynamic range, these are two sliders that allow us to just affect the highlights and the shadows only. So Nora the dog here is kind of sitting in shadow a little bit as it's backlit. So let's lift up the shadows, for example, as well. Now we've brightened the image somewhat and lifted the shadows. So it's kind of a bit flat, if you like, contrast wise. So a little tweak of the contrast slider should help that quite nicely. And don't be afraid to use the contrast slider. Often it's one of those sliders that you're told to avoid in photo applications because it's too aggressive. But actually in Capture One it works really super nicely. I'll also bring up the highlight slider. So this will affect just the highlights. So where it's kind of got a bit too bright where the sun's hitting the water, we can just give a bit more detail back into that. And finally, we can have a little look at clarity. And clarity is similar to a contrast adjustment, except contrast affects the whole image. So when you move that contrast slider, you're going to make your shadows darker and your highlights brighter. So imagine shadows are getting darker, highlights are getting brighter. And if you push it too hard, so let's be a bit more aggressive with contrast, let's really push it up, you can see it starting to look unpleasant because there's no detail left in the shadows, nothing much in the highlights and so on. So contrast we still have to be a bit mindful of. But if your photo is lacking some kind of depth and feel, then the clarity slider actually does a great job, because what clarity is doing, if you imagine your image is divided into sort of shadows all the way through to highlights, clarity just focuses on the middle, so the mid-tones. So not my shirt, for example, but more the mid-tone range. So what clarity gives us is a really nice pop to the picture. So if we just throw in a bit of clarity, if we want to preview what a tool is doing in Capture One, we can just click on the name. So if I click and hold on the name, then we can see before and after of what that image is doing. Sorry, of what that slider is doing. Now I'd quite like to crop this. So let's just hide me again for a second, so I'm not too distracting. We're going to grab our crop cursor tool from the cursor tools up the top. You can also press C on your keyboard, and then let's just throw in a crop like so. Now you can see it's popped up a thirds guide. You can always change that in the preferences if you don't like things like that popping up, but I find it handy for composition. And the crop will show for as long as the crop tool is selected. So I don't need to say enter to apply this crop or anything like that. For as long as the crop cursor tool is selected, I'm going to see my crop. Now I can also rotate by hovering in the corner, and if I then want to get rid of my crop boundaries, if I just choose my pan tool once again, then we'll see the image like so. Now if I want to straighten this, I can grab the straighten tool, I actually think it's fairly straight, and just draw along my horizon, and then it will nudge around that point. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to tweak the white balance a little bit. Let's open up Nora a bit more, and if we zoom into 100%, we see we've got pretty good detail considering how dark this was in the first place. Now if you want to preview all the edits that you've done, we've got a couple of things you can do. So up here right in the top right is the reset button. If I tap that, everything will go back to 0. If I hold my Alt key down and long press, then we can see before and after. So once again, before and after, like so. Another thing you can do, which is also useful for working with, say, a black and white conversion or just doing different things, we can make a new variant. So we can have a new variant, which is a virtual copy, which we might want to do a different kind of edit on, or we can clone our variant so we can get different adjustments like so. Or what we can also do, we can have a new variant which gives us a virtual copy without any edits. So if I shift click those two together, let's just hide my browser for a second, you can see how far we've come just by using a few simple sliders. So that didn't involve us having to do lots of clever editing tricks. That's just using a few of the basic sliders in the quick tab, and we get a really nice result. So if we want to compare these side by side, if I hold my shift key down and click on the plus button up here, that's going to zoom both in. So then if we just put Nora 1 and 2 next to each other, you can see the difference. So that's really the power of Capture One. Often we're asked, what's the difference between Capture One and other applications? It's the ability to make really good edits to your photos, pulling back that shadow detail, pulling back the highlights, keeping nice colors without having to do loads of clever or tricky editing tricks. So let's have a look at the questions again once more. Let's see. Richard says, please cover crop to a specific size. Sure, we can look at that. And yes, Sam, we have created a catalog. So what I should have shown you when we opened Capture One Express, if we look in our pictures folder, it's created this, the Capture One catalog, and there's the photos that we imported earlier, like so. So the catalog is just really a simple database. What's the proxy image or preview? Soren was asking about that. So for performance, if we just bring my browser back, and we can use Command B or Control P if you're on a PC. Let's just zoom out. Sorry, bring my browser back. So when I scroll through images, we're not actually reading the raw file. We're reading that preview file because it makes everything flow a bit faster. We don't actually need to look at the raw data, so we're looking at this preview. If I zoom to 100%, double click with my pan tool, now we need to look at the raw data. If we zoom out, then we're just looking at the preview, but it's all perfectly color matched and so on. And yes, Edwin, these are definitely in RAW. You can edit JPEGs if you want to, and we'll look at the difference between RAW and JPEG. We might do that in a second, actually. So you can see the difference between editing a JPEG and editing a RAW file, because that is quite different. And Francesco says, what does method do in clarity? It changes the way sort of the clarity maths, if you like, works on the image. 99%, I would say, go for natural. What punch does is add a bit of saturation as well. The other two are kind of older methods, but I would say play with natural, play with punch, and you'll see exactly what happens. All right, let's have a look at the difference between JPEG and RAW. So I'm just going to import something else, and now we can see how a secondary import works. So if we grab import, I'm just going to choose some different shots. So this time I'm going to grab some from my external hard drive, not a memory card, so we can import off existing locations. So I'm going to find some shots for the Australians out there. Let's get some from Russell Ord. Let's say open. So some nice surf pictures, for example, but we do have JPEG and TIFF example. So I'm going to say current location in the import destination. So they're going to stay on those hard drive. Capture One's not going to move them or anything. They're going to stay exactly where they are. So let's say import all. So those are going to start popping in. If we go to our first tool tab once again, we can now see that once that import process is finished, if we look at the activity monitor like so, so that's done. Let's just close that down. We can now see under Traveler SSD that we've got Russell's files here, like so. So if I want to go back to Sweden, I can click here. If I want to go back to Australia, I can just click on that one. So it's pretty simple to just navigate between your various different imports. Okay, what are we looking for? Oh yeah, JPEG versus TIFF. So we've got our surf dude or paddle boarder dude here, for example. I'm just going to hide my browser so we've got a bit more screen real estate. So this is the raw file, and once again, not necessarily an easy one to get right out of the gate because it's a little bit too dark and so on and so forth. So let's just get rid of my face for a second so we've got enough space. And what are we going to first do with this? Well, let's open up exposure to some extent. Let's also open up our shadows like so. I'm going to warm it up a little bit as well. It's probably better. And let's also add some contrast. With big exposure sort of compensation like that, it can be tricky to keep the contrast looking nice, and then let's add a bit of clarity. So it looks pretty nice. Maybe we could even push the shadows a bit more. So that's what we can do with the raw file. So let's zoom in. It's relatively high ISO. See, he's got some beers on his board as well. Nice work. So this is how it's looking at 100%. So it's pretty good. So that's our raw file. So let's go to our JPEG. So I can do Command B to hide the browser. So now the difference between the RAW and the JPEG, of course, is that the RAW file has just got so much more data to play with. The JPEG, we can edit JPEGs in Capture One, but if you're in a situation like this where it's kind of more challenging to edit the photo, then RAW files are always going to be your friend, if you like. So let's try and do the same thing. So let's lift the exposure, which we can do. We can still open our shadows, but you see now it's having less and less effect. So I'm really having to push the shadow slider, and I just can't pull that detail out. So now I need to try and brighten it a bit more, bring our highlights back down. A bit more brightness might help us. That brightens midtones, essentially. So we can get a little bit more, but notice that I can't quite get the same recovery. So if we bring our browser back, and let's bring our two side by side, let's be fair and just warm this one up a bit as well. So we just warm up the JPEG slightly, but you see even white balance has less of an effect. So if we zoom these two to 100%, let's go back to beers on board again. So you see this is also interesting. If we look at the color tones, so you see how we've kept that nice consistent color on the side of the board where it says Explorer on the raw file. On the JPEG, we've kind of got this nasty kind of color cast here, which then transitions into a different one, and so on. So yes, nothing wrong with working with JPEG files. If they're shot grayed out of camera on Fuji or Sony, then fine. You might not even have to touch them in Capture One. Small tweak, everything looks great. But if you've got an image which is compromised in terms of exposure, and we all make mistakes with white balance, exposure, you name it, then you've got all that elasticity in the raw file to pull it out. Okay. Sanjeev, you might have an older version of Capture One Express, just so you know, because we changed the workspace in Capture One 12.1. So if you've got an older installation, go to captureone.com, download, and grab the new download. So that's probably, Sanjeev, was why yours looks a little bit different. To see side by side is just a default behavior. So look, if I select my RAW file, let's zoom out, and I hold my shift key down and I shift click, then I get 4 up on screen like so. If we just select one image and I hold my command key down, or alt key if you're on Windows, then we can get 2 by side, and then I can just keep picking them out like so. Alrighty, okay, so what I wanted to look at next, and this is just for Fuji people, which is really important to how Fuji film simulations work. I'm just going to import something else. Again, gives you a chance to see the import process. So let's grab some from Jan Fauchier down here. So let's open these. So okay, so I've got 7 images here from an X-T2, and you can see some of them look black and white. Why is that? Because at the time of capture, they were shot using Acros film simulation profile. So let's import these. Here they come. Let's choose this one. And then when Capture One's built the preview, you'll see this snap into full sharpness. We're now showing exactly how the Fujifilm sim works in Capture One. Now these are developed in partnership with Fuji, so how it looks on camera, obviously taking into account the difference of a camera LCD and your monitor LCD, is that they should look pretty close. So what if you didn't mean to shoot in Acros, or you wanted to shoot in something else? Well, you can easily change it in Capture One. So if we go to our color tool tab, that's like these three little circles together. You'll see here in base characteristics, we can see the camera used, so X-T2, and then we have this item called curve. And by default, this is set to auto. And what auto means is that it's going to use the Fujifilm simulation that was set in camera. So in this case, Acros. Now, if you want to choose something else, we can just click on here and then you have access to all the Fujifilm simulations. So for example, if we didn't want that, we wanted classic chrome, I can just go right ahead and change it like so. Now the benefit of doing this, of course, if you shoot JPEG, then that film simulation is locked in, so you can't change it at a later date. So the benefit of shooting RAW and your film simulation means that you get the best of both worlds. So again, this shot is a little bit too dark, so if we go into the quick tab, I'm sure if I just bump up exposure ever so slightly and a bit of shadow detail and some highlight recovery and a bit of clarity, not that much, easy David, and a tiny bit of contrast, job done. But we still get the benefits of the great Fujifilm simulations as well. So don't forget, in the color tool tab under base characteristics, you can see everything there. Now for the older X-Trans cameras, X-T1, X-T2, they use a different processing engine. So far we only have the data from Fujifilm to work with the newer chips or processing engines inside the cameras to match that. So we're not holding back on X-T1 because we're mean and nasty or whatever. It's just a case of relevant data required. So please do send us a message if that's something you're interested in. Do the same to Fuji, but the process is really quite different on those older cameras to the newer cameras. So sorry to disappoint you for those older camera users. Not exactly old in this day and age, but that's the reason why they're not present. All right, so that's how the film simulations work. Okay, just do a quick time check. I'm just gonna have a look at the questions to see how we're doing. Differences between Mac and Windows, good question. Not really. I mean, the interface is the same. I mean, there's some differences when I talk about shortcuts, like in Windows, you don't have the command key, but generally that's using the Alt key on PC or using the control key. But all in terms of the interface and everything else is all really exactly the same. So the fact that I'm on a Mac doesn't really make any difference. And Richard, please don't forget cropping to size. Okay, Richard, I won't forget that. So let's just crop this image, for example. So let's grab our crop tool. So if we crop like so, if I click and hold on the crop tool, then we get the subcontext menu up, and then we can see various different aspect ratios like so. So if we want to crop 2:3, I can do so, and then that locks that to 2:3 as well. Also, we can see in the crop tool, where is it? Under the lens tool tab, we've got our crop, it's collapsed, and then we can see our sizes and ratios in there as well. So it is possible to crop to a specific size. We can just punch the numbers in there if you want to as well. One thing I should, now that we're in the lens correction tool tab, you see down here under lens corrections, the really clever thing about Sony and the really clever thing about Fujifilm is that they put enough raw data inside the raw file so that lens corrections are automatically taken care of. So we do some profiling ourselves, but you'll see here we've got manufacturer profile, which simply means that we use the raw data inside the image file to correct for distortion and so on. Now what you might find is that if we go back to Australia for a second, let's just pick one of these great shots. We can see down here, again, that's supported by the manufacturer profile. If you want to see what lens that is, that's an XF 100 to 400. Now, if we haven't profiled that personally, then it's going to default to the manufacturer profile. If we have got a lens that we've profiled, here we go, there's one, the XF 8-16, then it will pick the Capture One profile. And the difference with the Capture One profile is that we can also correct for sharpness fall off at the edges and light fall off. So the Capture One profile is a bit more extensive, but it simply means that if Fuji or Sony release a brand new lens tomorrow, it's instantly supported in Capture One, which is great. Okay. And yes, Dejour, if you shoot RAW, you can use those various film simulations in Capture One. Easy. It just happens by default and they look great. So it makes a lot of sense. Okay, before we get into some other things, let's complete the workflow. So what would we do next? The obvious thing to do would be perhaps copy pasting some results. If you don't want to edit, you might want to use auto and so on. So let's go back into the folders tool. Let's choose our Swedish vacation. And just to let you know, if the thought of editing shots is maybe not where you're at right now, then don't forget you can also do auto adjustments. So up here in the top right hand corner is a big A for auto, nice and easy. If we long press on that, we can see what that's going to affect. So all these various different categories here. If you want to turn off one of those, you can just deselect it. But now if I press A for auto, ta-da, Capture One does a pretty good job like so. The only thing it won't be able to do is rotation, I would imagine. But if we find something else, let's go for another tricky one like this dark one, and we say A for auto, then hey presto, it works really well. We can also do this on a batch. So if we select more than one, so if I select two and say A for auto, then it will do auto adjustments on both. So that's, you know, a simple way to maybe even give you a start point for editing, is to choose the photo and click on auto. Once again, let's try with this one, A for auto, brilliant, does a really great job. So there's nothing to be ashamed about just trying auto adjustments as well. Doesn't mean that you then can't edit it. So if you think actually this is maybe a bit too bright, I can just dial that back. Brilliant, I've got a nicely edited picture and away we go. If you want to copy paste from one picture to another, this links to Doroda's question, and I think a couple of other people asked. So let's say we want to edit this shot and copy it to the others, as they're all shot under similar lighting and so on. So let's go to the first one. It doesn't really need a great deal. I might just throw in a bit of contrast, and let's just pull the highlights down a bit because it was getting a bit bright on the side of the jacket here. And let's have some clarity as well. So I'm happy with those edits. So how do I get this across to the other shots? So I'm going to hold my shift key down, let's select these four, for example. Let's hide my browser so we've got some more space. Up in the top right hand corner, we've got our copy and paste. So all this simply does, if I say copy, it loads those adjustments into the clipboard. And now if I say paste, oh, helps if I click it, then it copies those across like so. So again, if I just do something drastic to the first one and we say copy, paste, then away it goes, sends across. So let's brighten that one up again and we say copy, paste, simple as that. Now, when you say copy, I said it loads those adjustments onto a clipboard. Where is that clipboard? You can see the little clipboard icon here. If we go to adjustments, then anything with a tick box simply means that it's been loaded into the clipboard. So if I wanted to take something off before I paste, then we can just turn this off like so. Another option, if you don't want to be using adjustments, is to explore styles. And styles can be used in conjunction with your own edits as well. So let's actually stick with these images. So I'm going to reset everything. So let's say reset. Yep, I'm going to reset adjustments on those four pictures. And let's look at styles. So we have some built-in styles. You can always buy more from Capture One and other vendors are selling styles as well. It doesn't have to be from us, but some free built-in styles are right here. So if we open up Spring, then all you need to do is just scroll down the list, and then you get an instant preview of how the style is going to look. So if I like the look of, let's go for Spring number 5, click that. It's now applied the style. If I want to take it off, I can just click once again. Simple as that. If we want to apply that to a lot of photos at once, all we need to do is select them. And if I go back to Spring 5, you can see all 4 photos change pretty much at the same time. So now if I want to apply that style, click once, and now it's applied to every single photo. That doesn't mean, once again, you can't do some edits. So for example, if we want to then just tweak this image a little bit, I can go back to my quick tool tab. I can just bring the highlights down a bit more and then add a bit more contrast. Capture One styles, or styles that we make, we never change the white balance and things like exposure. So anything that's kind of dependent on the environment, we don't put in a style. So the idea being, the style creates the look and feel, and then you can change those environmental factors that need adjustment, like white balance and exposure, and build on from that style. That makes the styles a lot more versatile, to be honest. Okay, so let's wrap up our process. So we've done some edits, we've used sliders, we've done auto, we've used some styles. So that's 3 different ways that you can edit your photos. Now, obviously, we now want to get these out to JPEG, TIFF, or whatever, to share with friends, family, peers, and so on, or uploading to social media. So how do we do that? So let's take these 4 shots, for example, and what we want to do is say File, Export, Variants. Now, it's a funny Capture One term, which simply means we want to export the edits or the image with our edits. So originals, that just gives us another copy of our raw file, which isn't particularly useful most of the time. So we want to say export variants, or even easier, just click on the up arrow here, and that will take you straight to the dialog. This is really straightforward and simple to follow. So we just run from the top to the bottom. So where do we want to store our shots? So let's just go to, let's choose a folder. I'm going to say let's put them in pictures. Subfolder, we can just call this Sweden Vacay JPEGs, like so. We can rename them if we wish. I'm just going to keep it the same as the image name. And then here we can choose our various different formats. So let's just go for a JPEG. And we're going to choose sRGB. And we're just going to resize these down. There's various different ways we can size. Width, long edge, short edge, you name it. So let's say we want to make these a bit smaller to upload to the web. So let's make this 2000 pixels across, and simple as that. And now if I say export 4, processing kicks in. See the little process wheel here, and the activity monitor pops up. And then when we're ready, Capture One tells us where it is, and then I can just go to pictures, and here they are, like so. So there's our final finished shots with our style applied, and so on and so forth. So if I wanted to do additional exports, it's just a case of going back into that dialog once more. So remember, the easiest way to get to that is just the export arrow right here. Okay, I need a quick slurp. Whoops, managed to empty most of that down my front. All right, so let's have a look at the questions. Once again, let's see, Q&A tab. Yeah, you can customize the crop sizes. So in the crop tool, just change the aspect ratio, or in the crop tool itself, you can punch in the values there as well. Let's see. Steve was saying, why do my X-T3 raw files look soft on a ISO monitor when my Nikon D810 raw files look sharp? Well, It's a bit hard to answer. There could be lots of factors on that. Could be the lens down to being used. I mean, the X-T3, I have an X-T2, which is similar. So with the kit lens, it's an okay lens, but it's not as sharp as like a D850 with a super duper lens. So different sensors, different cameras, different lenses. It's always going to vary a little as well. Any difference on the film simulations done in camera versus Capture One? No, they're developed in relationship with Fujifilm. So of course, based on obviously the difference between your monitor and the camera LCD, they might look a little bit different and so on, but mathematically they are exactly the same. So it's not like we've looked at the Fujifilm simulations and tried to replicate. We have all the data from Fuji to mathematically create them as they should look. Okay, let's see. What's the latest version of Fujifilm Express? Good question. So we are on 12.1.1. So if you're not on 12.1.1, then go ahead and grab that. And that's just captureone.com/download. You can't clone on Capture One Express, so there isn't that ability to do any sort of retouching or spotting. Those features are in Capture One Pro, of course. And if you want to look at Pro, as I said, we can have that discussion very shortly as well. Okay, can we look at the curve tool? Yeah, sure. I just want to check my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything important. But hopefully what you've seen so far is that, you know, it's very simple to just get some images into Capture One and start working. You can use the auto edits, you can use styles, you can use the sliders, or a combination of all three. It's very straightforward and simple, and also very powerful. I mean, Capture One Pro obviously is a long time ago was purely only a professional application, but historically it's always driven towards giving you the best quality. In terms of working with Fujifilm and Sony, then of course we have a close relationship with those companies to get the best image quality out of your cameras as well. In version 12.1, we also improved the X-Trans rendering as well. So if you have a Fujifilm camera with a X-Trans sensor, then you're going to see an improved result in 12.1 as well. Now, someone earlier, sorry, the name escapes me, asked about sharpening and noise reduction. If you're learning Capture One, I would really not worry too much. I'm just looking for the Nora that we edited. I would really not worry too much about thinking about noise reduction and sharpening. Do I need to edit those? Now, what happens in Capture One, whether you have a Sony A7R or an A7 or a Fujifilm X-T2 or X-T3 or whatever, we treat every camera as an individual. So when we add support for a camera, we shoot loads of pictures for it, we shoot color targets, we shoot people, we shoot different skin tones, around 700 files to create a custom look in Capture One. And part of that process is defining what the default sharpening value should be and what the default noise reduction value should be as well. So in the little details tool tab here, you'll see sharpening and noise reduction. Now the sharpening values will change based on the camera that we're looking at. So you can see here sharpening, and this is a GFX 50, I think. GFX 50, yes it is, just looking on the metadata right here. If we go to a different photo, let's go back to Australia. This is a X-T2, and if we look at the sharpening values, you see the radius is slightly different. So all of the sharpening is tuned to the camera model. The same goes for the noise reduction. It always looks as a 50-50-50, which are the default values, but in the background of Capture One, we might do something a little different as well. So whoever it was who was asking, I did see actually a couple of people. Don't worry too much about thinking I need to always edit the sharpening, I need to always edit the noise reduction. We've done that bit for you. So if you're on an X-Trans camera, don't think you need to do any special tricks for sharpening. The default works, and the same goes for noise reduction. Now if you do want to play with that, then let's go ahead and edit this shot. So I'm just going to reset that. So this is a little bit too dark. Let's go to our quick tab. Let's open up exposure. It's a bit on the flat side, so let's add some contrast. Let's warm it up a tiny bit, and let's add some clarity and open up the shadows a touch. So simple and fast edit. If we go to sharpening and noise reduction, let's have a look at our surfer. So these are the defaults that we think gives you a good compromise between not being over sharp and not being, mushy. But if you want to tweak it, just to keep it simple, just play with the amount slider and just bump this up a little bit until you think it looks better. The same goes for noise reduction. This is maybe ever so slightly noisy, or it's just particulate in the water. So luminance will get rid of that just kind of grainy noise, so we can bump that up a bit if you need to. If you increase the detail slider, you'll get a bit more details, but potentially more noise as well. And the color slider, I would imagine you never have to touch. So that just gets rid of color noise, and the default generally tends to zap that. So I would just focus on the first two. Single pixel is almost unnecessary these days, but in older cameras at high ISO and long exposure, you might get some black and white dots, or white dots or black dots. Single pixel would get rid of those. But you might see, depending on your camera, it has a couple of points of value in there. But sensors are getting so good these days that we don't really see those issues anymore. But in terms of sharpening and noise reduction, if this is something that you think, I don't really understand how it works, leave it at the default. You're not going to be disappointed. Just with a few simple tweaks on this shot, we went from that option click or alt click on your reset button to this. So it's simple and fast to get a nice result. Okay, so I think almost we're going to come to the end of our session. What we're going to do is I'll look at the last few popular questions, talk about an offer that we've got for you guys, and then if you want to, I'm more than happy to stay and stick around and show you Pro. We can open a poll to ask shortly, or we can all go home. So it's up to you guys. You are in the driving seat. So let's just check the last few questions. Oh yeah, curve tool. That was it, and that's it. Can we run Capture One with earlier versions with El Capitan? Now we always go 2 versions back. So we're on Mojave, so you can go High Sierra and Sierra. So that's Mojave. So we support the current OS and 2 versions back. Supporting more versions than that, it just gets very complicated and reduces stability in a lot of cases. So the current release and 2 back. Can you cover straightening? Yes, we can do that. And I think that pretty much covers the other things. Does Capture One Express support NIC collections? Well, there's no reason why you can't export to NIC and do so. But to be honest, with the tools that you've got in Capture One, and we haven't explored all of them, we've only looked at really sort of simple stuff. But don't forget, you've got color tools as well, the color editor, so you can play around with your colors. You've also got a black and white tool, so if you want to go to black and white, it's very straightforward as well. So I would see how far you can get in Capture One, bit of a challenge, without necessarily having to go to external editors as well. Okay, watermarking, Dinu, you can do in the export dialog. That's just, oh actually, I don't think you can. I might be telling you a lie there. No, it's not possible to watermark in Express. You can watermark in Pro, but it's not possible in Express. And I think that was about it. So Carl is trialing C1. Great, thanks Carl. For exposure bracketing and focus stacking. Focus stacking, I'd recommend Helicon Focus. That works really well. I can't remember if Helicon does exposure blending. Have to have a quick look, Carl. But it works brilliantly for focus bracketing. I haven't really found personally anything which does a better job. And finally, let's just have a look. can we export directly to Photoshop? Yes, we can do that. So when you say export, see we've got open with, so we can open with directly into Photoshop as well, if you want to do it that way. Or secondly, if we say edit with, so that's right click on the image or selection of photos, doesn't have to be one, right click or control click and choose edit with Photoshop. And then that way it will create your TIFF, JPEG or whatever you want, put that next to your raw file and then pop that open in Photoshop. So this is like the round trip process as we call it. Okay, and last but not least, if you do want to play with curves, then in our exposure tool tab, we've also got levels as well, but curves, it's just a simple case of moderating the contrast as you see fit. So we have shadows all the way midtones to highlights. So if I want to make my shadows darker and midtones brighter or highlights brighter, we can do so. And you can have as many points on the curve as you wish. So it's a little bit more, or gives you more control than just using a contrast slider, but requires a bit more understanding. So if you again feel that's beyond what you want to do or don't really care to get that involved, which is totally fine, then the contrast slider does a great job, but the curve is an additional tool just to give you more control. But it really is a case of make this tone brighter, if I exaggerate, or darker, and that's it. And then the control points you can pop anywhere on the curve just to make the kind of shape that you want to, like so. So more control, just more effort required. And Capture One is available in a bunch of languages. So I'm sorry I don't know the number du jour, but plenty. All the common languages in Europe and worldwide, Chinese, Japanese, pretty much everything in Europe. So you should be fine. Okay, I've got one thing I want to pop up on screen, if I can find it. Just to let you know, let's just slide this out. You can close this yourself if you wish. Did I actually do that properly? Slide out, here we go. So just to let you know, the Pro version, which we can talk about in a second, is currently at 50% off until the end of August. So from now to the end of August, it's on a 50% discount. And Capture One Pro essentially gives you a whole bunch more features. Additional tools, shoot tethered, so you can connect your camera and shoot directly into Capture One. Fully customizable interface, so much more than you can do with it Express. You can run multiple process recipes at the same time, so shoot out your JPEGs, TIFFs, PSDs all simultaneously. A bigger, better color editor, color balance tool, more editing options, and so on. So in case that is interesting, then you can take a look at that. If that pop-up is annoying, then of course you can just close that down as well. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to say is, if you want to see Capture One Pro, I'm more than happy to hang around. So if you think that that's interesting, just put your hand up or throw a yes in the chat or something like that, and I'm more than happy to spend 15 minutes just showing you Pro. For those of you that perhaps want to leave, I'm just going to put in the chat learn.captureone.com. Like so is your resource for finding tutorials, webinars, guides, all kind of searchable with keywords and everything as well. So that's 2 for Pro. That's good. That's enough for me. We can definitely look at some of the things. All right. Okay. So for those of you who joined just to look at Express, thank you very much for joining. You'll receive a email sometime tomorrow with the recording. So look out for that. It's been a pleasure having you, and I appreciate it's difficult giving up an hour of your time to look at this. But thank you very much for hanging along, coming along. All right, let's have a look at Pro. So if you're in Express and you want to switch to Pro, there's something very important that you need to do. So you need to find license in the menu system. On PC, it's in a different place. It's in the help menu, I believe. I think. Yeah, I think it's in the help menu. Anyway, you'll find it relatively easily, so you need to find license. So if you click on license, what you need to say is say change license, because every time you launch Capture One, it's going to stick in Express until we change the license, because Express you can run forever. So let's say change license, and now we need to quit. So now we are coming out of Express. So now when I relaunch Capture One, oh, it's on my other monitor. Come here. It's on the other monitor. We now get back to the startup screen. So what we want to do is say Pro, which works on every camera. So if you have Fuji, Sony, Nikon, a whole bunch of cameras at home, then Pro is the one for you. But if we just want to stick with your brand, Fujifilm or Sony, then we can click on that. So my trial has expired, so I'm just going to activate my Capture One Pro, like so. So I just need to find my license key. Don't try and copy it because it's tied to my email address, so it's not going to work if you try and do a sneaky copy. It's happened in the past. Actually, just in case, I'm just going to hide this in case anyone looks at my password. Hang on, let's do that. Put my password in and say activate. So it now says Capture One is now being activated. So done, like so. And now we're in Pro mode. Okay. So what we do is, let's close this down. So now it's going to look somewhat different, if you like. You might say intimidating, but it essentially gives you a whole lot more features. We're in the same catalog, so if you've been running Express and you want to see, you just want to keep using the same catalog, that's fine. You don't have to re-import everything. It will just kick off from where you've left off. Now, if I go to the default workspace under Window, you'll see it's going to look a little bit different. So traditionally, it's kind of a small thing, but traditionally Capture One has always had the tools on the left-hand side and the browser on the right-hand side. What we found with Express is that people were more comfortable with it the other way around, but there we go. But that's why you'll find in Pro that we have this arrangement like so. So what you'll see is we have more tools, more customization options. So if you look in the view menu, we can move all the things around a lot more readily. We can create floating tools, for example. We can rearrange where the tools are and so on. And we can also right click on any tool tab and any tool in it. So and add any tool. So you can really create the interface for you. So that's the first big distinction between Express and Pro, is that we can do all that customization. Second distinction is some of the tool behavior as well. And I'm not going to show you everything because we could do a whole other hour, but I'll just give you a couple of highlights. Before we get to that, I'm just going to open a different catalog, which has some different images in it, for example. Because I'll show you two things. I'll show you the color editor, how that's different, and we'll look at the color balance tool, because that's a really fun tool for creativity. So for the color editor, let's go to, I'm just going to pick out a different shot. So let's just reset this one and we go to the color editor. Now in Capture One Express, then you're limited to the basic color editor. So the basic color editor just gives you these 7 zones which we can then choose from and then make some changes to the colors, for example, like blues and so on and so forth. But it's relatively sort of limited in terms of range and what you can do. In Capture One Pro, you get the advanced color editor, which gives you the ability to really shape and control the color range that we can edit. And yes, Kate, we're definitely going to look at masks. So for example, if I want to edit this blue sky, I grab the color picker, I click on my blue sky, and Capture One gives me a suggested color range that I'm going to work with. I can make this tool bigger as well, which you also can't do in Express. Now to visualize what's going on, I can turn on view selected color range, and now I can see exactly what color range is part of my edit. Now the cool thing is if we zoom in on our observer down the bottom here, so this dude, right now we can see that he is not part of the color range, which is great. But what I can do if I want to include him in the color range, because his jacket, if you remember, is also blue, but it's at a higher saturation level than the blue sky. But we can say to Capture One, include everything within that color range, or just the lower saturated ranges, like so. So not only can I adjust the saturation range, if we zoom out, like so, and then we drag it in this direction, or let's go this direction, I can also include, say, like the warmer tones here in the rocks. Now in the basic color editor, you can't really do that. You can change some ranges, but it always affects its sister. So the color editor just gives you that really super duper control. So if I just want to change the sky, we can get rid of his jacket. So I can turn this off, and now I can make my blue sky darker and more saturated, for example. I could also change the hue in either direction as well. And let's say we want to warm this up. I can grab the color picker once more, click on the warmer tones here, turn on view selected color range. This tells me what is part of that range. So it's just that kind of band of light here. So I could also include probably the rocks in the background as well, or I could cut those out, and so on. Just gives you loads of control. So now if we turn this off, I could darken this down, make this more saturated, and so on. So the color editor, brilliant. One of the best tools in Capture One's arsenal. So I say the basic tool is fine just for doing simple color tweaks, but the advanced tool gives you 30 different picks that you can do. So it just gives you loads of scope for editing. So that's one thing, the color editor. Second thing, let's pop this away. Let's find a different shot from Ryan. Let's reset this back to default. So what we can also look at is this one, the color balance tool. Now let's just crop this to get rid of yellow jacket man in the corner. So let's go something like this. Do some basic edits once again. So let's open up exposure, lift up the shadows, have a bit of contrast, and that's probably pretty good, and some clarity as well. So a few basic edits. And what the color balance tool is, if any of you have any experience of video editing and color grading, it's very close to that. Now once again, you might look at it and think, what on earth is this tool doing? Any of you can learn to use it in 30 seconds. What we simply have is a split of shadows, midtones, highlights, and the ability to throw a color into those three zones. So a typical cinematic color grade is to grab up the center spot, bring it towards cold or teal, and this will just tint the shadows. Now if we go to midtones, we go to the reddy orange kind of things and throw in a bit of color to that, and the same the highlights, we could redden up our sky. So you've now learned to use the color balance tool. It's that simple. Now on the right hand side we have some luminosity sliders. So if we pull those down, then we can change the density of each of those. So it's another way to play with contrast as well in a really simple interface. So now you have learned to color grade, and that's pretty much the principle of it. To see before and after, I'm going to hold my Alt key down on the keyboard and do before and after, like that. There's also a master tab which just allows you to throw in a color tint wherever you put that little ball in the circle. And to reset, we just double tap, and then we're back to the center. So this is a fantastic tool for anything. Now Cheryl, in terms of masking, this is another hugely powerful option in Capture One Pro, which allows you to target different areas for different adjustments. And the premise is in the layers tool is that we grab our brush, we make a new layer. This is layer 1, so we give it a name. And then if I right click, I get various brush dynamics like size and hardness. And then, for example, wherever I brush, if I press M on the keyboard, you can see my mask like so. And then edits will only happen in that mask. So if I grab exposure, for example, then it's only going to happen on that area. Now that doesn't really look great on an image, so let's delete that layer by clicking minus and do something useful and relevant for this shot. So I can see that on this one, for example, what I'd like to have is a bit more detail going on in the engine casing here, because it's a little bit too dark. Like if I pull exposure and we just brighten this, it's actually quite a bit going on there. And what tends to happen is that our eyes sort of gravitate to dark points in a photo and to bright points. So we try and want to get rid of those distractions. We don't want to be peering at some element. So I just want to lift this area a little bit. So what I can do is I can grab a brush and we can just do a quick sort of mask in this area. There's actually a better way to do this, but I'll show you the quick and dirty way. So we've drawn our mask, and then now I can think, let's just lift the shadows in this area. There we go, done. Now, of course, that doesn't affect any other part of the shot. So we can do a simple edit like that, which just adds 10% more, credibility or niceness to the image without having to do anything complicated in Photoshop, or go to a different editor as well. So if I turn this layer off, then you can see before, turn it back on, and after. Just a simple little thing like that can really help a photo. If you're as old as me, who grew up in the darkroom, then we were very used to doing that with printing, varying the exposure on paper and all that kind of stuff. Horrible job, really complicated, really frustrating, really easy to do it digitally in the kind of digital darkroom that we have here. So you can have up to 16 layers as well. And what we can also do is some basic cloning and healing as well. But each layer, which gives you even more power, has an opacity slider. So we can dial in exactly how much we want to have. And the same goes for styles. If we go to a style, so if we think we might like a style, so let's just look at these various styles. So let's say I'm quite liking the look of style number, what should we go for? I want something warm, so let's go for this one. What we can actually do is right click on the style and make a style layer. So if we say apply to a new layer, if we look at our layers tool, I've now got a style as a layer. And the benefit of that is that we can knock the opacity down, because sometimes styles that look great on one photo don't look so great on another photo. So with the opacity, we can just dial this down to where we think it looks good. So that makes one style into an infinite number of styles, because we can just vary that impact. Okay, how are we doing for just checking on questions and things? Is there a history of edits? No, you've got multiple undos, so I can always step back, but you don't see a history panel. Remember, everything we're doing is non-destructive, so it's not like Photoshop where every change you're kind of destroying pixels, for want of a better word. Everything here is non-destructive. So we can step back an infinite number of times, but any action that we've done, if I've decided, this is too much on my shadow recovery or whatever, just changing this. I mean, I'm not changing anything in the raw file itself. It's all totally non-destructive. Now, with regards to, I saw someone about installation. Express, of course, you can install on 1 billion machines if you have them. If you buy Capture One Pro Fujifilm or Capture One Pro Sony, you can install on 2 machines as well. You can buy a license outright. So what we call a perpetual license in technical terms, which means your entitled to upgrades for that release number. So if you buy a license for version 12, if 12.1.3 comes out or 12.1.2, you're entitled to get that for free. If a new release comes out, Capture One 110 or whatever, then you pay an upgrade price, which is less than the price if you bought new. If you subscribe by paying a monthly cost or you buy a year in one hit, then you're always allowed to get the next release. So you're constantly up to date. So depending on how you feel, then you've got lots of different choices. No, there's no cartoonization tools as such. So that's down to applications which are outside of my wheelhouse, I'm afraid, de jure. No, there's no cartoonization possibilities. So I'm afraid I'm no expert in that matter. All right. Is the recording going to include the pro section? Yeah, of course. I'm gonna include that as well. That's no problem at all. So that will go in there as well. Okay. I'm not sure of your question, Angelique, but layers you can still copy paste. So there's a little copy paste button in each tool. So if I select another image, won't really work in this case, but if I have another image here and I want to copy the layers across, I can just say copy and then apply, and then it will copy those across. It won't in this case because it's two different sensor sizes, but it's just a copy and apply in that case. So that's how you can do it. All right, and the last thing, I mean, there's tons of other stuff in Pro, but the last thing probably that's worth highlighting is the process recipes. So before you saw in Express, we just had the ability to say file export images like so. What we can do in Pro is that you predefine your output. So I want Instagram and I want a JPEG and I want a TIFF. All of these three have independent settings. And then when I say process, then it will process those shots 3 times in this case. A JPEG, a TIFF, and my Instagram output. They can have unique locations. They can have different sizes. They can have different naming conventions. They can have a whole bunch of different stuff. And you can watermark and everything as well. So that's really one of the big differences between Pro and Express as well. Oh, somebody wanted to see cloning and healing. It's relatively straightforward. Let me just grab a image. So we've got a rogue eagle here, for example. So if we wanted to get rid of this guy, what we can do is we click and hold in our layers and we add a new clone or heal layer. So I'm going to go for heal. That matches the luminosity. And then if we say draw mask, all I need to do is Alt and choose a source. So I want to grab a bit of sky here, for example, and then I'm just going to get rid of eagle, and then it will clone or heal from this location to this location. So if I hide my mask, get rid of my brush, then you see it's gone. So simple as that, really. Okay, I think that probably gives you a taster of Pro, and I said I'd only do 15 minutes, but that's 20. There's lots of resources on our Learning Hub, as I said before, so learn.captureone.com. Don't forget, if you're interested in Pro, we do have the 50% offer currently on at the moment, and that's only going to run until the end of August as well. So you can always pick that up in our store as well. All right, so many thanks for your time today. I very much appreciate those who stuck around to see Pro. It'll do a great job for your Sony cameras, Fujifilm cameras. Martin, yes, if you don't want to be restricted to one brand, then we have Capture One Pro, which covers 500 cameras. So Fujifilm, Capture One Pro Fujifilm, Capture One Pro Sony, and Express Pro and Sony. That is made possible by close relationships of working with those manufacturers. So if you have a Olympus or whatever, or Nikon, and you want Capture One Olympus, then go tell Olympus as well. we're more than happy to work with anybody. There's no restrictions or politics at play or anything like that. So very simple to just ask for those guys to do that as well for you, the customer. All right. Thanks for joining again today. It's been a pleasure seeing you all and spending an hour and 20 minutes with you as well. So take care and see you all again soon. Bye now.